So welcome everybody again, July again, not a Sunday. No, we are having a lot of specials this month for you folks. Apart from our regular Sunday interviews, this is an interview with somebody that I'm close to saying I would call him a friend, but I don't know if he has any friends. So I'm very happy to have Eugene Robinson from Whipping Boy, Buñuel, Oxbow here on the show. Eugene, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, man. It's a good way to spend the day before 4th of July here in America.
Yeah, so also people now know the transparency right here. We're recording on the 3rd of July, so we're going to start fireworks a day earlier. Eugene, usual question that I don't ask, but I ask it always, and especially with you, although I think I know the answer. Shirt of the day, is it again some kind of jiu-jitsu stuff?
No.
Ooh.
It is the former porn review site. It's like a porn onion that I used to run for over 10, 12 years, Skull Game. Short name for Mac Avenue Skull Game. It was like a cross between the Onion and Yelp for porn. So and then I decided to turn it into an apparel brand after we killed the website, which still is Firewall, but still in existence. And so this is what I came up with. Blood in, blood out. It says very much the same thing on the back. I was really happy with the skull. So no jiu-jitsu shirt today.
Oh, nice. So you see, folks, the man is prepared. It's like, what is it? Our third interview, third video, fourth all in all?
Yeah.
He's like too often on our show. So again, anybody asks, Ashen Spire on my site. And a little hint at everybody, listen to the new record by Rylan Gleave, the live voice from Ashen Spire. Published at the end of June under the moniker All Men Unto Me. The record is called In Transit. You might have seen a review here on our site already. It's a very, very interesting record, which in a way reminds me a lot of Lingua Ignota. But coming back to Eugene, we are not here to talk about music. Well, indirectly, we always talk about music. But the reason for this is your biography. Would you call it a biography or a memoir, first of all?
It's called a memoir. That light. I don't know. That light sucks. It's too bright. It's called a memoir.
Okay. And also to make it clear for this man doesn't need a ghostwriter. He wrote it by himself.
Yeah.
Which is also
yeah.
You go on.
No, yeah. I mean, I've had friends who have dictated their autobiographies to a writer, and whatever. I mean, it's you can still hear their voice through it, but yeah, I wouldn't have had. In fact, we're in talks right now for the audiobook, and Audible hires somebody to do the reading, and I was like, I don't know that any sane person would want to get my memoir audiobook and not have me be the one reading it. So,
well, no, because everybody wants me to read it for them.
Yeah, that would be a nice twist,
Hey, if you get Audible to do that, you can come onto our show every week.
There you go.
I would be up for that because I would definitely be up for it. I mean, like nobody will ask me, but I would be up for it because what I like about the book is how should I say? It is very good, not only because you tell your story, but also because it is clearly your voice. Anybody who has ever read stuff that you wrote will recognize that little tinge of sarcasm that is like a signature thing of yours. Which is very interesting because we both know that you are a sarcastic person. We all are, because otherwise we wouldn't stand a chance in the world. But there is this twisting of sarcasm and truth that I really like about the way you paraphrase things, and that was something that I really enjoyed about the larger excerpt of the book that I had, and I came up with something for this, and I hope that you hope it fits to the memoir up to this point. I would like to start out by reading something for everybody. So we are gathered here to mourn the passing of our dearly beloved brother Eugene. Eugene was a wonderful, sarcastic bastard. He had a few friends who didn't know, and a few who believed but weren't. He always gave his best in a fight club, and his life was a fight, with him and without him. We will mourn him for all his vocals and vocality, and we will also mourn the fact that he made us laugh without thinking about it.
Okay.
I didn't want to go too long.
No. I would have gotten into something that had a little bit more to do with the fucking, but okay. Good for you. You gave the PG version.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that's a good eulogy. I'm glad I was around to hear it.
So
versus the other way,
But are there things in there where you say, okay, I don't see that about myself, or also maybe points where I say, okay, that's spot on?
Well, sarcasm is a distancing device, and I don't employ it as much as a tool as I think that what's coming across is a wry take on reality that I don't take overly seriously, right? So, I think that is somehow that maybe is missed, and I find when I have a discussion with somebody who I've got friends who are stand-up comedians who that is their stock in trade, and they have a reflexive kind of sarcastic take on just about everything. That after about half an hour, I find it wearisome. Um, because it's one thing to understand and have an appreciation for a wry a wry side take. It's another thing entirely to undercut earnestness, and I find myself to be a fairly earnest person but with a decent sense of humor, so I wouldn't automatically credit that all to sarcasm, but whatever, can't control what they say about you after you're dead. As long as they talk, and I guess maybe things are fine.
So you mean as long as you're still a talk of the town for a week or two, that's a good thing?
Well, there's a guy, isn't there a guy, I think he was a Dutch guy who staged his own funeral. And then, of course, during the course of the funeral, a helicopter lands and he gets out and he's like, I just want to see who was going to show up. And I was actually I was very angry about that. What motivated this guy, he said, was the fact that his kids didn't come to see him a lot. So he said, I want to know who really cares about me. And I was outraged. It's like, you get one, and you're not going to be there for it. You try to cheat the system. As far as I'm concerned, if I'm related to you, you're dead. You had your one. Good luck, bro. See you never.
And if you then rise from the dead, then you're still dead to people, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you remember the dwarves did that. They faked the car accident and said, "Oh, the dwarves had a car accident," and the community was really fucking unforgiving. And I remember feeling that's a little okay. They pranked us. You should get a little credit for that. But people like record labels were dropping them and shows were getting canceled. People were actually very angry. And I was like, maybe I didn't feel that anger until this guy did this thing with his kids. As a father of 4 kids, I have to say that I would feel them to be justifiably chagrined if I were to pull some stunt like that. How desperate how desperate are you for validation? And I don't really feel very interested in validation. You were there when I was having that discussion with Ruby, my second kid, and my go-to is always, so are you saying we're never speaking to each other again? Is that what we're saying? Because if we can just get to that, I could save myself some time. And she says, no. Just to be clear, I will never say that to you. I was like, okay, so then we're discussing, and I'm stuck in this discussion. I'm fine with that. But if the ultimate end was going to be, I have to have this discussion, and we're going to get there, then screw that. I would rather die now than to die later. So
I'm like, that's taking King Lear to a whole different stage, right? If you seek your validation that much, I would agree with you. But on the other hand, and I think that is what you might have lacked in my question, is it important for you that people talk about, or would it be important for you that people talk about you after your passing?
No, and I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago. But I'm dealing with issues of mortality every day. Every day I'm doing a tally of things that I will probably never do again. Things that I will not get to do, things that won't get done, even up to and including the possibility that I live another 30 years. So, I mean, we're in the last, like that line I use in an Oxbow song, the last and final mile here. And so my concerns are much more about eternity at this point than they are about anything that's happening on this grand granite planet. No. Um, so it's I wish I could be more gracious about it. I wish I could develop a quality of grace that I see some older people bring to bear. It's like, the ride has got to end. So this shouldn't
Yeah,
be confusing to you or shocking or unsettling or any of those things. And I don't find them to be that, but I do find that I'm not doing a good job of making my peace with it. I'm not enjoying the prospect of my exit from the planet. Even though, if you look at it, it seems to be the best game going, right? I mean, we are on a spaceship hurtling through the vastness and the darkness of space to an almost certainly unpleasant end,
yeah,
and getting out of it by dying seems to be to a certain degree a relief, like you're cheating death by dying.
yeah, yeah.
but
You go
but
out earlier, right?
yeah, but I'm sort of wedded to the things in this life that have given me pleasure. So
Mhm. That is a very interesting phrase, because I think that that is also something that a lot of people forget in this day and age, that there
mhm.
are lots of things that give them pleasure. I think a lot of people in this day and age are just seeking new forms of pleasure, new forms of entertainment, for
Mhm.
the lack of a better word, without noticing what they have. Is that something that you also notice? The speed with which things are developing and people are seeking?
Yeah, I find somebody had once pointed out when they were talking about iPods in the early days. And my first exposure to an iPod was not an iPod, but it was a hard drive. And a guy who was a music guy that I worked with when I worked at Adobe, and actually we worked together at Apple as well. He shows me a hard drive. He just shows me this piece of machinery. Before, if I showed you a hard drive now, you go, "Oh, a hard drive," but I didn't know what it was then, right?
Yeah,
This is early. It is in the '90s, and I go, "What's that?" He goes, "My entire record collection." What are you talking about? He goes, I took all the 1,000 records I had in my garage. My wife was bitching at me about it. Sold them to Goodwill. I gave them to Goodwill, and I put them all on this. And then I remember reading something that said that people are fundamentally have a base level of distress at the reduction of their mass.
mm,
So even though he was touting this as a positive, I have all my 1,000 records in this device here, that it caused me, in the instance, a certain amount of stress. And I think psychically, the writer was making the claim it causes all of us, a certain amount of stress, especially if you've grown up with mass. These are my books. These are my records, and now it's all on a device that I could fit in the palm of my hand. That creates a certain stress. So I find our entertainments are very much the same. We our entertainments in the old days required mass and things. I'm gonna, you know, experiences that had to be embraced, and I mean, it required a lot of working parts. And now, people can never leave their places, like this Japanese not Shinobori, but there's this Japanese thing where people are just not leaving their houses anymore. This has nothing to do with COVID. They're just not going out, and usually it's men, and they're not seeking dates, and not trying to meet people, they're not going to parties, they're not drinking, just staying at home, and of course using that avenue to the world, which is called the internet, right? So I find that to a certain degree distressing, But at the same time, I'm glad to have those people off the road.
That's true.
In California, this makes a big difference. The fewer people I have driving in front of me on the freeway, the happier I am. So I guess it's okay. But yeah, it seems to me a harbinger of darkness. Right?
Yeah, and I think at the same time when your colleague says like, okay, I have my whole record collection on this, to me it sounds like he's already dead in a way, because he put an end at collecting new music and adding stuff to his collection and going through things. As soon, for me, if anybody said, okay, I still have a hard drive here, but it's full with interviews from Veil of Sound. So if anybody said, okay, that is my whole record collection, I would be like, okay, so when you're gonna get your casket? Because
Yeah.
I think I guess that both of us think about it in
Well,
the same way.
also,
You go.
yeah, also as a writer, I also know what that means is that you do not have the lyrics. You do not have the artwork, because that is not artwork. That something that fits between my fingers is not artwork. Okay.
Yeah,
And typically, though, Apple Music says, "Oh, you can download the lyrics." I still have people asking me, "I don't know what you're singing in your songs," because yeah, you bought the record, yeah, but I didn't get the lyrics, so okay.
I downloaded it, and let's be honest, if you buy those lyrics on iTunes or Apple or wherever you want to do it, or if you just look at Genius and look them up there, it's never the same. I honestly believe that
No,
even if anybody does it, it's not the same.
well, it's actually not the same.
Yeah.
Somebody in Berlin did an interview with me, and they were asking me about Gentleman's Gentleman. Of course, I have to check. I have to check to make sure the lyric I wrote is a lyric I think I wrote. And so I type it in to Google, and Genius comes up, and I was like, "That's actually not the fucking lyric. I don't. Did you guys didn't get this from the lyric sheet, but okay, okay." So
Yeah. That's also, by the way, something that I noticed. I honestly believe that Genius has a lot of its lyrics just by having a device listening to the stuff and trying to second guess what the guy is saying.
Yep, yeah, I felt that way.
Yeah, lots of fun with black metal songs, by the way, Genius, when trying to do that, or Cannibal Corpse.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But coming back to your memoirs, what I like about it is, or another thing that I like about it is the thing that you make very clear that you don't want to be seen as a victim, as somebody who has lived through the stereotypes of an African American upbringing, or being part of another minority group, aka your religious group. You said it very, very clearly at the beginning of it. So don't bring how do you call it? Don't bring me that black bullshit.
Yeah, because it's very comfortable to think I'm doing some kind of Tarzan thing, like I'm giving you a glimpse into how that my identity was framed by being trapped in some sort of archetypically terrible American collision with blackness, where my blackness has always been very comfortably in place. I have never no, it hasn't been a negative issue for me. I don't start my days with like, I wonder what kind of black guy day I'm gonna have today. It's an issue for the white people around me. Never been an issue for me. So if you're expecting that I'm going to give you some grand insight into the black condition, you have gone, you're barking up the wrong tree. I'm giving you insight into Eugene's condition, which is, Eugene, the black guy. Make it for what you want, whether or not I'm speaking for the whole or a portion of the whole. But I'm not writing as a representative of a racial caste or category. I'm writing for me,
And it's very interesting, and I think that's something that a lot of the guys who listen to your music, no matter if it's Whipping Boy or Oxbow or Binuel or any other project you've been in, and also for me, I didn't know that. You say it very, very early on, and I quote, taking up residence in the house of my parents a mother who would eventually become a guidance counselor, and a father, a former Air Force intelligence officer who spoke 5 languages and would later be a professor. So in taking up residence in the house of my fathers in Jamaica, Queens was more than an improvement. It was a dream. When
Yep.
you look at your childhood, what is the most wonderful thing that still stands out to you?
Oh, I used to have I had a great childhood. There's actually some video from my 4th year alive, of going over to a holiday celebration at my grandmother's house, and my father was in it, and my great aunt, my great grandmother, my great grandfather, just a lot of people who are now no longer in existence. And I don't remember having, any bad times. And I think this is reflected in, I think you can always tell, like, I think there's a reason I have 4 kids, right? And I think there's a reason why my sisters who are 10, 11 years younger than me, or at least 2 of the, actually I have 4 sisters, and they're all about the same age younger than me, and only one of them has kids. And the one that has kids plural, she had twins, so she really has like 1 kid,
Doubles.
So I think their sense of their childhood involved much more agita than mine did, and I think it's reflected in the fact that I've chosen to have 4 kids versus,
One or
no,
two.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I have a lot. I have a lot of really overtly positive memories, and I didn't start to accrue bad memories until that section in the book where I talk about the first time they tried to kill me. I was about 5 years old when those guys in the neighborhood tried to kill me, and that was a drag. But before that, I don't have any real sense of life fraught with difficulty. I got bitten by a dog. If you ask me to remember, I got bitten by a dog. Other than that,
Mhm.
I had a great time. You know.
When you mention your sisters who are like 10, like a decade younger with you, do you think it also has to do with the decade that they were born into? I mean, like, you were born into the 60s, they were born into the 70s. Do you see a parallel there?
Well, okay. My mother and my father got divorced when I was about 5. So that would have been 1967. It was not common in 1967. I mean, celebrities did it. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. But the average person just didn't do it. People left, or they didn't stay together always, but to actually go through a divorce or go to court and stuff like that. And it was pretty effortless. I mean, like I mentioned in the book, one day I said, "Hey, where's Dad?" And she says, "Oh, he's at the city apartment." So I said, "Oh, we have this house here, and then we have a city apartment." I didn't really, I think maybe they talked to me about it once in very simple terms that maybe a 4 or 5 year old could understand. I don't remember it being a thing for me. In other words, they had had a decent marriage and then went ahead and had a decent divorce, right? You could not say the same for my sisters were products of second marriages on both sides, and you can't say the same for how those marriages unwound and played out. Those were miserably difficult battlefields. Did that have anything to do with the 70s? Very possibly. Different people, different experiences. But on both sides, my mother and my father's side, their second divorces were absolutely fucking terrible. And
Mhm.
my sisters were all products of and in my father's case, not only was his second divorce terrible, but his third marriage was really terrible for everybody else around him. And my mother's third marriage was actually, I mean, she's still married now, 30 years plus to her third husband. So that worked out for everybody. But her second one was a complete fucking catastrophe. And my sisters on both sides were the brunt of that misery. So it makes sense.
Would you say that your mom and dad had a good way of handling that situation after their divorce with you, so that you had enough time with both sides?
Well, they didn't talk shit about each other.
That's a
which
good
is
thing.
super helpful.
Yeah.
And my father, to his discredit, moved back home. He is originally from Washington, D.C., so he moved to Maryland, which is very close. And as a kid, thought that that was terribly far away. It seemed really far. As an adult and a guy in a band that's toured, I realized that that's nothing. That's about the distance it takes from where I'm sitting right now to where I go snowboarding. So the fact that I only saw him once a year after that, I saw him Christmas and 1 month during the summer. I think it was gross negligence on his part as a father, but he was
Mm,
working on getting his PhD. So whatever, he made choices. If I were 4 hours away from my kid, I would see them more than an afternoon
mm.
in December and a 1 month during summer where in which I got to see the back of his head because he was working on his coursework. So
Yeah, and
whatever,
all,
different
yeah,
strokes. So
yeah, and also, in that 1 month of December, you cannot make up for 11 months of not seeing you, of
yeah,
course.
which is why we've had one discussion since I turned 19. Right? We have no relationship. In fact, they called me to say that he had had a massive heart attack a few weeks ago, and my first response was laughter. So, that sounds unkind, but the
Yeah,
guy died for me. The guy died for me 41 fucking years ago. What are you calling me for with this
yeah.
shit now? I don't care. So
Is the relationship that you had to the second husband or the third husband of your mother a different one, a closer one?
oh yeah, yeah. My mother's second husband, still referred to as my stepfather, though he's not married to my mother. There was from the time of 6 till I was 18. That's great.
Mm,
I mean, I don't really get along well with his third wife, but whatever. It's functional. And my relationship with my mother's third husband got off to a rocky start. But I love him now. He's great. So, my father's third wife is a piece of shit, however.
which doesn't
And
matter anyway because he died only
yeah,
before you.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly. Right. So,
I know what you mean.
precise. So, yeah.
Um, but is you still in at the beginning of a book you talk very respectfully about him, about your father. Do you see some things in yourself that you inherited from his side?
You could glean that from some of the stories I've told about him in the book. That him being a bass playing spy, touring musician, spy, things I didn't realize that one conversation we had after I turned 19. But we are character wise very different people. In a very specific way, he has been very weak. He's been a very weak member of heterosexual pairings.
Mhm.
And I have this is just antithetical to my being in total. I'm not a tyrant or an asshole or especially very bad to be within a relationship,
But you're not the
but
inferior partner.
well, I'm not letting if as happened to my father, if my new wife were not to get along with my kids, I would not make a choice for her over my kids. Just say you guys get the fuck along, uh, work it out, make it happen. And in fact, I think my wife's mother had said that she thought I was a good choice, and she said, "Oh, why? I mean, there are lots of reasons why he might be a good choice, but why do you think?" And she said some version of, "Well, he won't take your shit." So that says,
Yeah.
which is not again, it's not like I'm a tyrant, but what is that the line from that Linton Kwesi Johnson song where he says, "I'm a merciless realist," So
Yeah. But I think there is something very true to what you're saying. I mean, like there is something like in what Dean Martin said, right? You got to give a little, you got to take a little. That's the story of that's the
hmm
glory of love. And
Yep,
I think,
yep, yep, yep.
I would add something to that, and I would say like You don't have to run over anybody, and you don't have to let anybody
Yep.
run over you. Yeah,
Yeah,
but that is
yeah, and
true.
then I remember I had this girlfriend I had where she was very much in the habit of. It's like there was that line from that the David Lynch movie Mulholland, is it
Right,
Drive or Fall? Drive,
right.
yeah, where the cowboy scene where he says, "How many drivers does a buggy have?" He goes, well, one, right? So if you fix your attitude, we might get someplace cool, you know. And so she had this idea that there was a killer and the killed, and I said, no, 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 this is parody. We are hiking together. you know, I don't want to. I'm not driving this mule team, and I don't want to be driven. We are walking together to a destination uncertain. So you got to take it on faith that I know what I'm talking about when I'm talking to you, and I will take it on faith that you know what you're talking about when you're talking to me. We are coming to this as equals, and so the 70s were not lost on me or wasted on me. And I'm not a big fan of anything traditional in that regard. You know, I grew up with tons of women. Four sisters. I got four daughters. You know, I have aunts, cousins. The only men in my family were born in like pretty much every 50 years, and that's held true. My uncle Sammy was about 50 years older than me, and my grandson is about 55 years younger than me, right? So this is we're sticking to that. So that means a lot of female cousins and aunts and so forth. So
Yeah, as somebody who has a similar background, not blood related wise, but I also grew up around women. We always had women working for my family's shop and bakery, and
mm,
I can understand that. I can understand that.
yep.
But I also think it gives a certain perspective on life, which I
Hmm.
deeply admire. I can still remember I was, I think I was 10 or 11 when Dirty Dancing came out.
Hmm.
And I still remember one of the employers of like the bakery, our bakery, she all of a sudden came, like it was a Saturday afternoon, and she came like, "You come to the movies with me." And I was like, "Okay, whatever.
Yep.
Movies,
Yep.
fine." I go. And then we
Yep.
go and watch Dirty Dancing, and she was like, "That's the way that you will treat a woman."
It's funny you should
I mean,
say
like, I
that
still
because
haven't
that was
lifted anyone like that, but there is something in
right.
there.
Well, look, there was a constant refrain like in my house growing up where my mother said, "Don't be one of those guys, who think that sewing is something that men don't do, or cooking, or your father knew how to sew, your father knew how to cook, he could do anything. So, do not." And I appreciate the lesson. So yeah, and I could tell right away actually guys who grew up with more women than men. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you also?
It's interesting, especially in light of given the fact that so many of my pursuits seem so aggressively masculine, from Brazilian jiu-jitsu to weightlifting to guns to muscle cars. But that's just playtime. I mean, generally, if left to my own devices, I spend most of my time around women. So.
Hmm? But do you then also had the same thing when looking at the guys that your daughters came around with? Like, come on, he's like a masculine asshole. Let's get somebody else for you.
Well, I used to jokingly say that I was encouraging lesbianism, and so when two of my older daughters came home with their girlfriends, they were very funny. They thought that, like at one point I was like, "Grandma's coming out, and I want you to come on by." And my oldest daughter at the time, she was with a woman. She goes, "Well, I'm going to bring her," and I was like, "Fine." And she's like, "No, I'm going to bring her." I go, "Yeah, fine. What do you?" She was thinking it was going to be a thing. It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
you like her. I don't give a shit. You like her.
yeah,
I like her. You bring her
yeah.
by,
Mm.
and okay, this is my oldest daughter is the one who's got my grandson. So now she's with a guy, and I like him too. But she's dated some guys that have been complete pieces of shit who I didn't like. But at one point she was asking me, and she thought it was a class issue. She goes, "Why don't you like?" And she felt, the guy's name, and I said, "Because he's a perpetual fuck up."
Mm.
He's a perpetual fuck up. And it's like, this is like, you're gonna spend your life cleaning up after this guy because he's fucked up again. There's a movie I like to imagine being made called The Losers, and the tagline is, they had one last chance and they blew it again and again. I go, that's him. And she really listened to me. And, of course, it was a relationship with domestic abuse, which both she and my sister had relationships with domestic abuse. And of course, the best person to tell would have been me, but my reputation preceded me, so they concealed this from me because they didn't want my overreactive Brooklyn response to that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So, same, my second daughter said, "Oh, I'm gonna bring home Rachel," and I'm like, "Cool, whatever." This is, it's, how are you gonna? I mean, I've often thought, how are you gonna rebel against me as your father? There's nothing that you could. I'm gonna take some drugs. Okay, what drugs? What are you taking? What are you? How much? Who are you gonna be with? Set and setting. Don't drive a car. Well, I'm gonna get a tattoo. Okay. Well, I'm gonna dye my hair. Okay. Well, I'm gonna bring home my
Yeah.
girlfriend. Okay, whatever. Yeah, the one way that my kids, it's like, they were tiptoeing around like, Dad, I'm going to church now. It's like, whatever. It's not that was probably the most upsetting thing I've heard. But whatever. If you want to go to church, it's there. It started with AA, and the AAs are done in churches, and then you find fellowship there, and okay, whatever. It's your choice.
My daughter knows that there
I
is
would, I,
one.
I, I, I would be more upset if they were lazy, and none of my kids are lazy.
Mhm.
So,
My daughter knows that there is one thing that would drive me nuts, and that
mhm.
is something that you guys don't have in the US. But there is a certain kind of German pop music that I hate from the bottom of my heart. Like,
Is it Europop?
it's worse than that. Yeah, it's something like that, but then with German lyrics, we call it Schlager. If she came home with somebody who
Yes.
would listen to that shit, I would honestly be thinking about if I went to the wedding with earplugs. Like,
A friend of mine who's a drummer used to be a drummer in Terrible Disease, and was also a drummer in my wife's new band, Meniki Necro. He got married and went to his wedding a few years ago, and his wife usurped the playlist, and it was all what they call in Poland disco polo.
oh yeah, shit.
And
Yeah,
oh man, it was absolute fucking torture. Absolute torture.
I would be sitting at the wedding like,
Well, that's what alcohol is for.
yeah, but
You
remember
know.
I'm straight edge. That doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, yeah. But a glass of wine, it doesn't have to be drunkenness. A glass of wine takes the edge off quite nicely.
I'll remember that when it comes that way.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny. I was the first on the fight book thing. I had the first reading I did on it. It had me and it had Vale from Research Books. And it was at an art gallery, and a lot of people showed up. And the art gallery owner said to me, he said, "Is there anything I can get you? Anything?" And I go, "Yeah, if you have a glass of red wine, it would be great." And Val was like, "Red wine?" And he's like, "I thought you were straight edge." And I go, "Vale." He goes, "I'm straight edge, and Biafra's still straight edge." I go, "Vale, I'm 45 fucking years old. Okay, a glass of red wine does not imply that I'm an alcoholic. Do you
Yeah, yeah,
understand that?" He goes, "Well, I don't give a fuck what you think. I'm going to have this wine and I'm going to do the reading. And then I'm
yeah,
going to get my car and drive home. It's
yeah,
pretty simple."
yeah.
He's like, "Okay, okay. Oh, that's okay then." No, no, I'm not asking for your fucking approval. Some bullshit that Ian started back in 1981. Fuck that. Don't drink if you don't want. That's fine. I'm having this
Exactly.
glass of red wine.
And
So,
that is also something that I have to say. If anybody asks me, and for example, going to Roadburn, doing some Roadburn specials, people
yeah,
asked me
yeah,
already this year, they were like, "Can we buy you a beer?" And I was like, "Buy me a
yeah,
cola." Well,
yeah,
why? Because I just don't drink alcohol. And it has never
yeah,
been a decision. It has never
yeah,
been a decision in my life because I have a father or I had a father who was an alcoholic. I have a mother
yeah,
who's addicted to cigarettes. I've
yeah.
seen a friend of mine die because of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I just had so many negative examples in my life. It was never a decision. And when I, in my 20s, started thinking about it and noticing,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I am unconsciously straight edge, it has never been a decision. And
Yep.
that is, I think, also the best way for it. I'm very, very
Yeah.
sure that if you decide on it and if you
Mm-hmm.
want to stick to it for life, and you have to be a very, very straightforward person.
Yep.
None of my friends, none of my other friends from back in the day who were straight edge are anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided on it, and I didn't. And for me, it was never a question. Also
Well, I
because I
stopped.
never, also because I never went to the thing like I don't wear leather. I have to be a vegan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sex is like nah, nah.
Yeah, that's why that's the one I resented the most. I probably could have gotten a lot laid a lot more if I hadn't have been, because I stopped drinking when I was 17 and didn't drink again until I was 36, because it dawned on me. I go, somebody offered me a glass of red wine with dinner, and I was like, it's just dinner. I can have it with dinner. I was concerned about the way I used to drink at 17, that I would drink that way for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case. I had a glass of red wine with dinner and it was perfect. So, I mean, but still, it's not in my mix of things to do.
Let's get back to
I
your
mean,
knob.
yeah, I spend all my time exercising, so it's really not in my list of things to do. But the
Yeah,
novel
but
is.
then your addiction is exercising.
Well, my addiction was fucking, but I didn't talk about that in the memoir. So,
Yeah, that would more have been like Skull Game, right? But
yeah.
anyway,
Yeah, right.
coming back to
Yeah.
the memoir, and I think there is also something in there. You have a whole chapter that you call the rape years,
Hmm.
which in itself is a title that when I read it, I was okay, shit. And I
Hmm.
already had, of course, I had like the stereotypical things in my head,
Hmm.
but we might have to explain that a little bit. What did
What things
you,
did you have in what things did you have in your head?
domestic abuse,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
real hard domestic abuse? That was
Hmm.
what came to my mind, and that was what I was afraid of. In a way, it sounds strange when I say afraid, but um, it is something that that you hear so often about children, and I'm still not in my mind quite clear on how I would deal with child molesters.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, it's one
but
thing when you're an adult and it's another thing entirely when you're a kid and you don't know, right?
exactly.
I mean, so
And maybe you could explain why you used the word or the title, why you came up with that. Let's put it like that. Maybe just a little
um
insight into it.
because as an adult you finally you um I, maybe it was precipitated by this discussion I had with my grandmother, who I stopped seeing, hadn't s- I didn't when I let me put it this way. When my father got separated, divorced his second wife, he got into a fight with his mother over what I just barely hinted at. So at the age of probably about 12, that was the last time I saw my grandmother until my 40s, where I decided where the internet made it possible for me to find her,
Mhm.
and I found her. And I flew out to visit her in Washington D.C., and she started talking about her life, which I talk about it in the book. And she talked about my father's father, and she said, and she told me about how they met. The circumstances of her conception. She was 13 when she had my father, and the phrase that she used that got me thinking along those lines. I asked her, well, so what happened? And she kind of paused and she goes, well, nowadays, they would call it rape. They didn't have language. She didn't have language for it at the age of 12. And given that my grandfather did what constituted the right thing in those days, which was to give a last name and some sort of financial, ownership of what had happened, it was glossed over that my father was a child of rape, right?
Hmm.
And so then it started to come up that there were a lot of instances in which I was either viewing rape or was in a position where, bad things were happening to me that they could fall comfortably under the rubric of rape. I remember when people were getting sexualized. I was 9 years old, and little girls were having sex in the garage. I mean, most 9-year-old girls are not seeking to have sex with 10, 12-year-old boys in garages unless shit has already spun badly out of control. So I
Yeah.
just the rubric I wanted to put on over it was the rape years, and I just wanted to, you know, the book stops at the creation of Oxbow. So in anticipation of the possibility of a second memoir, I'm setting the seeds for you to understand exactly why Oxbow was the way Oxbow was. So, and to a certain degree, why I was the way I was or
which
am.
is
Thank you.
which is yeah, let's please stick to the present. Which is also interesting that basically when taking you and taking your memoir and your first 60 years on this granite rocket ship that you've been mentioning, it gives a very good perspective on not only those 60 years, but basically, I don't want to go as so far as to say the last century, but last nearly 80 years, maybe a little bit more.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
which is also very, very interesting because, as you said, you've collected in this book. You not only collected your memoirs, but also memories from your family that have happened
Mhm.
beyond or before your birth. When you look at it, do you see a change? Do you see a change, maybe hopefully to the positive, between, let's say,
Yeah.
1925?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there have been lots of, there were elements of my grandfather, the rapist, that have served me have served me in a good stead, and not in the rape category, but he was also a committed and lifelong criminal, organized crime. But which doesn't sound great to most people, but in my instance, what this was him and his brothers, he and his brothers deciding that whatever America had in store for them, that they were just not buying in. they were not gonna, they weren't gonna go for the okey doke, that they were not gonna, just hope things worked out and, run off to church and do that kind of, response to adversity, that they were going to do much like organized criminals that were Italian or organized criminals that they were cut out for something better, and they were going to go out and get better, and if there was hell to pay, then they were willing to pay it. And that, I was just talking to a guy about that in jiu-jitsu. We are talking about the piece in the Substack I wrote on affirmative, it's called affirmative inaction. And he's like, the reality of it is, he's a contrarian, and he's saying that anybody who's poor in America can change. Anybody who's poor anywhere in the world can change their station in life through hard work. And this is no surprise. This guy's a Republican. I go, are there any extenuating circumstances that you would allow that would excuse a failure to have done so? And he goes, there is no excuse for non-performance. So whatever you got, you have no legs. He used an example, guy who has no legs and he's in a wheelchair. Guy who used to have legs, has no legs, is in a wheelchair. His future is determined by him. And that's very nice kind of Republican talk. But I said, look, most people, I believe, there are only two categories of people that have real problems. If you have a chronic fatal illness, you've got a real fucking problem, right? If you were sexually or physically abused as a child, shit that happened to you before you were 12 years old will color the rest of your existence, and you might have a real problem. Everybody else has difficulties. So everybody else is covered under the rubric of, yeah, hard work might be a way out for everybody else, but those two categories, and he would not even allow those two categories, which means to me, see, this is a little bit of Republican myth making and insanity. There should be I mean, this is why we have homeless fucking encampments all over California, because this idea that pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, it's not working for everybody. And it hasn't worked since guys started getting back from Vietnam and changing the whole tone and timbre of what life was like unhoused. So we're meeting halfway, I guess, where I think that we're meeting halfway. But there's things that, I mean, character issues that I never knew my grandfather. Let's call my grandfather the rapist, but I'm sure his unwillingness to just take whatever America was offering and say that was enough, I think has informed me, probably on a genetic level that I can only guess at. So
Yeah, I can imagine that. And what always strikes me, of course, about those Republican excuses that they make up that everybody can make a good living out of anything. No, no, not
yeah,
out of
well,
not out of anything.
but he's parent. Like, for example, I'll give you I was wanting to give one of my kids a gun. Right, I used to have a federal firearms license. You know, even though I'm left on the political spectrum, you know, I have firearms. And she said, "No, I don't want a gun. Don't want it. I don't want it." And I was like, "Okay, that's probably good fathering. I probably shouldn't be giving my kids guns, right? Even though I want them to go to a range and learn how to defend themselves and get guns." And then she turned around a month later and said, "Hey, you know what? I think I'll actually take that gun." And now I didn't want to give her the gun. You see, it's one thing to be gifted one; it's another thing
Yeah,
to ask for one,
yeah, that
right?
is
And this is
true.
so in terms of the hard work thing, it's one thing. I think he and Republicans are are definitely paranoid about the asking.
Yeah,
They will give help if they perceive that help is going to solve a problem, but once you ask for it, they constantly, continually feel like they're being gamed. And in America, I think they're probably right about half the time, sadly enough. So,
well, hmm, I would have
I
to
mean,
give it
no,
a go.
I mean, no, because there's a prison in Norway called Bestoy Prison. And it's there's a they're they're experimenting with penitentiaries, and it's
Yeah, I know.
what we would call a luxury prison, right? You stay
Isn't
at
it even
Bestoy.
an open prison?
Yeah, you're staying. It's on an island, but and I interviewed the chief warden there, and he's like, I said, "So it's only people with white collar crimes." He goes, "No, we have murderers and rapists here. Everybody. The punishment if you don't make it on this island is that you go back in the general population with the other prisons. You don't get to stay here, but everybody has their own house, like a condo. You can windsurf, you can play tennis, you have flat screen TVs, you have microwaves, little shops you can do." Because they want to reintegrate normal people into society,
Yeah.
not crazy killers who came in and they're going to leave crazy killers. And I was like listening, and the guy was making he goes, "Our recidivism rate here is like 1%, which is much lower than any prison in America." I said, "But you got to understand, in America, this system would be gamed 100%. If you live in a shit neighborhood look, Manson, the first time he let him out of prison before the Hollywood killings, pled not to be let out. He got enculturated. He was used to prison. It's like, that's my home. Right? There are plenty of people who shit in prison is the most stable thing that they've had.
Yeah.
You got 3 meals, you got all your decisions made for you, you got your job outside of the occasional anal rape, you're fine. So
That is what I like about about Eugene's writing. Everybody, the occasional rape, everything.
I actually the occasional anal rape, which it
Yeah,
makes it even
yeah,
worse, right? Right. You try to ignore that, but so I think that there can, so I agree that there are people whose situation is so dire that in America that they would game like if you
yeah,
opened up a Bestoy prison in America,
yeah,
there are people who would commit crimes to get into it.
yeah,
So again, I think the Republican paranoia is justified, but of course, let's get to the source. What does it say that your life is so terrible that you would choose a prison over a life on the
yeah,
outside? It means that you've abandoned hope. So,
yeah. What do you think is worse, homelessness or hopelessness?
oh, hopelessness is clearly worse. There's a guy who went to Harvard who at least was living on LA Skid Row. He started his own business, a multi-million-dollar business, gambled on himself. The business went belly up. Guy couldn't hang. He's on the street. but he's got hope. You know,
Yeah, because
he's
he
got hope.
says, I done it once, I can do it twice. Probably,
Yeah,
right?
you know,
Yeah.
but I've seen people in you know, I live in a low income neighborhood here, and I've seen, you know, driving through the neighborhood, going hither and yon. I've seen the faces of 14-year-olds who should not have these looks on their faces, and the look like is like, and I said to this guy who I was arguing with today, I said, listen, you know, it's one thing for you and I to have a pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but you know, there are actually kids out there, 14-year-olds, and I mentioned this kid whose face I saw, who's probably been raised by parents who said, "You're not shit. You're not gonna be shit.
Yeah.
You come from people who are not shit, and anything you do is absolute." And day in and day out, that has. He didn't care. He said, you know, it's still on them to either accept or reject that, and if they work hard, they can work their way out of it. Which fundamentally is like saying, if you work really hard to get up from your knees, you can stand. Well, what about the 100-pound weight on my shoulders? If you work hard enough, you can stand with 100 weights. I go, what about the fact that I have no legs? If you have no legs, you can try, you can stand. It's kind of a
Yeah.
weird Republican fiction. He's not spending his
Yeah.
days driving by 14-year-olds who are hopeless. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's much worse to have no hope.
When you
And
look
keep in
back,
mind, this is coming from a guy who spent time with a gun in his mouth, right? So yeah, no. And my second year that I talk about, yeah, I don't even know if I made mention of this in the memoir, which I probably should have. I think I did. I was sitting around my room with a shotgun in my mouth, seeing if I could reach the trigger. You know, so
yeah.
hope kept me alive.
Is that also something that you think is connected to a certain drive? Because the Republican guy would have said you just have to have the drive, the inner strive for it. Or
Yeah,
would you is it
I think he did make that claim. I think he did say that. Yeah.
so what is more important for you? The striving or the hope that by striving you can succeed?
No. The failure of what you just said is the idea of the end being success, right? And at this point now, I'm not doing anything because I believe success justifies me doing it. You know,
Mhm.
some guy wrote about my Substack. He goes, "Don't send me this shit." I go, "Bro, you subscribed." He goes, I didn't subscribe to this. I go, it's a subscription only service. So you or somebody recommended you. I got nothing to do with it, you
Yeah.
know? And the guy was being really insulting. I think he was wanting me to say fuck off, but this is cut and dried. Nobody get who you're in this club because you desire to be in this club. So you know, um, yeah, I would, but I think I brought this up because I told him you can join the billions of other people on this planet who don't know, care, or like anything that I do. You know, I'm not out to, you know, James Patterson is a very popular writer, but I don't desire to be James Patterson. Or what did Dylan say in that Don't Look, that Penny Baker documentary? He goes, I could sing better than Caruso if I wanted to. I just don't want to. Now he might be wrong about that, but you know, I desire to do as I'm doing. You know,
Yeah.
the outcome, the outs, whatever. Yeah, okay.
Let's jump a few years in the memoir because you've already said it. The memoir stops before Oxbow is founded.
Well, it
You've
goes right up to the creation of Oxbow. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So, but it isn't big on Oxbow. You know, it's not like the story of Oxbow.
correct,
And
correct.
you moved west. You moved to Stamford, if I remember correctly, right?
Yep, yep.
Was that move to the West Coast also a move, like an escapist move?
No,
Mhm.
no, no. It wasn't. And in fact, if I had come to visit, I may have not made the move. But the first time I showed up in Stanford was the first time I'd been to California. right?
Mhm.
I didn't visit the school. I looked at pictures. I read some stuff, some books, and I was like, okay, it's only 4 years. If I don't like it, I could leave. But keep in mind that I left New York in August or September of 1980. And that was a super fucking exciting time to be in New York, right? From Basquiat to, just this is before AIDS had kicked in. It was still a place of great and rampant possibility. It's before crack had hit. So
It's
it
after
was,
the Bronx was burning. It's clear, of course.
yeah, yeah. So there was just still, this is the tailings of the disco era, which only possible because of cocaine, right?
Yeah.
This is the reality of it. That there was people did cocaine back then, not knowing it was going to be bad or lead to future life problems. And there's certain music that you could hear was coke fueled, coke enjoyed, and like KC and the Sunshine Band. I had a friend who played trumpet with them, and it was it was a glorious time. It's like if you look back at old ads when your doctor would recommend that you smoke cigarettes before people knew this shit was bad for them, right? I mean,
Take a Pall Mall. It's good for you.
exactly. And I mean, sex, the biggest thing you had to worry about was herpes was not even an issue then. So I had coming west, I'd gone back in time in a really weird way. Or as luck would have it, I actually came forward in time because I stepped into what soon became the Reagan Revolution, and all of the shit that burbled up in a national way was happening in California in micro. This could, young people and conservatism, and it's just weirdness. I left a 24-hour party people in New York, and I came to this provincial backwater of California. And yeah, I was close to San Francisco. So there was, there was punk rock here, and that was kind of cool. And there was the whole, the Castro Street, all the lessons from Stonewall. So you had to still have thriving gay culture here. So which was a party site. But that's I was at school,
Mhm.
and I was at school with kids who were usually, getting A's and noses were buried in books, who had no sense of, I don't know. I was just, like I said, if I'd come to visit, I never would have stayed. I would have gone to Boston. So
If you would have gone to Boston, I think we would never have had these many conversations. I hate the city. I don't know why. All the people
I
in
hate,
Boston who listen,
yeah.
all the people in Boston who listen to this, I love you. I don't like your city.
Well, one of my favorite bands of all time was from Boston, SSD. And back then I was skateboarding, and so Jake Phelps, who later ended up being editor in chief at Thrasher, was part of that whole scene. I think I could have done fine in Boston. I think it would have been very easy to find my people in Boston. But Boston is still a weird place, man. I haven't really been able to get my hands around it in a comfortable way. But I feel the same way about Chicago too. It's just a city that confuses me, and not in a positive way, right? So
Never been
San
enough
Francisco,
there. I think
San
that's
Francisco is easy to figure out. LA is easy to figure out. A lot of cities down south are easy to figure out. DC is easy to figure out. Philly is even easy to figure out. But Boston and Chicago still bamboozle me. So I've had good times in both cities. It's not talking down the city, but I've not been able to get my head around it. So
But you would also say that this move, no matter how hard it was, no matter how strange it was in hindsight, it was like a changing point for you, right?
in many ways, there's stuff that I got here and said that I would never do. That of course some woman, Klaus's wife told me, you go to San Francisco, you're gonna get a tattoo and get your ear pierced. Well, she was right about that. But even though I got my tattoo in New York, and I think I got my ear, I pierced my own ear myself back when I was there. But um yeah, like I would say, I would never get in a hot tub. It seemed like craziness. Californians take baths with each other. I'm not taking a fucking bath with other humans. Of course, now I like hot tubs. It's like and of course, for me, the big deal would have to have been, the consumption of hallucinogenic drugs in 1981, which kind of completely changed my my perspective in a lot of ways, and which would have been completely impossible to do in New York, right? In the way that I had done, where Timothy Leary would always recommend that you check your set and your setting, so as you're not overwhelmed by exterior factors when you're consuming these things. But California, the flora and the fauna is just such a beautiful place. It made it easier to do that. And I've since then taken hallucinogenic drugs when I've been in New York one time, and that was yeah, the vista opening that the move to California allowed, I now understand would have been completely impossible to have happened in New York. I mean, I'll give you an example of what I mean. So I'm vision questing around Lower Manhattan, right? Taking a bunch of LSD, and I'm walking around just being present in the moment, right? Watching the city, talking. I was with somebody else, we were talking, and we go to Chinatown, and some guy sees me and he starts waving me over, you know,
Mm.
universal hand thing. He's a Chinese guy, and so I don't feel any physical threat, mostly because he's smiling and he's waving me over. And so I'm in the moment. I go over to him and I'm smiling. I'm like, hey. And he's like, hey. And he's like, come closer. So I come closer and he has a cooler at his feet. Right. And he's like, he's gonna show me something, the cooler. I go, man, this is gonna be fucking cool. Whatever he's gonna show me, he chose me out of all these people. He saw me, saw something in me, and we were now fully embraced in this moment. So I bend down and he yanks the top off, and it's full of fucking eels. And the eels are all like struggling to get the fuck out. You listen, you haven't taken LSD, but I tell you, this was a shock to the system. Fuck, bro. That's the last thing I expected to be in that cooler. I don't know what I expected to, maybe a crab or some oysters or some shit. I didn't expect a whole bucket full of snake. And and then I laughed because I realized that it was just that he had correctly, that this was the most perfect of moments, right? But New York is that wouldn't have been as welcome of an experience for anybody else who I'd probably ever taken LSD with. So,
Too hectic of a city for you? That's what you're implying?
it matched the tone and the timbre of the city perfectly matches my personality. But the experience of taking psychoactive drugs was not to cater to my personality, but was to create a space where I could kind of confront my personality.
Mm.
So New York is too much me for me to, and again, and that incident, that was a positive one. A less than positive one was I was trying to get back to the hotel I was staying in, and there were 4 or 5 guys who had just come out of a bar, and these were douchebags, right? These were the guys who watched the movie Wall Street or The
Mm.
Wolf of Wall Street and said, "Those are my people," like fucking fraternity boy yuppie types. And so they're down in Lower Manhattan and they're fucking shit up. They're like throwing bottles, and we're at there's a it's a four square. It's like a big intersection, and they're on one side of it, and they're like, smashing bottles, and then they see me across the street, and I see them see me, and then I see them across the street. And you have to understand how I'm using this words. I'm not talking about looking at each other, but
Yeah.
seeing each other.
Yeah.
And I could see them go through the thought process of like, there's a guy alone. There are 5 of us. Fuck
Mm.
it, And of course, I do this whole calculation of if they come over here, I will have to murder them.
Yeah.
Murder them. All of them. Not gonna be, like I said, the bad shit that's happened to me in my life has created a situation in which I said that will never happen again. I'm not gonna be the fucking plaything for your night. That's not gonna
Yeah.
happen. So we just looked at each other across the street, and they did the wise thing and decided to. And it's not entirely clear that it would just be me killing them. I might also die during this exchange.
Yeah.
They just decided to do it, and they turned, and that is way too common in that fucking city. So that's what
Yeah.
I mean about it. It matches my energy.
Yeah.
The progress I made with psychoactives could only have been made in California. So In other
Uh,
words, where I could find spaces to actually embrace who it is that I was versus having to try to buffet outside influence. So
Do you think that without that experience and without the move, I mean, like, of course, Whipping Boy would not have been possible without a move to California, but do you think that Whipping Boy would have been possible without the usage of psychoactive drugs?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think Whipping Boy. Uh, um, I think my use of psychoactive drugs predated Whipping Boy. So,
Hmm?
um, yeah, for sure. I mean, I know I went to the Grand Canyon with two guys. One guy is now a philosophy professor with a focus on Spinoza up in Toronto, and a friend of his who went to Yale for something, and they took some LSD, and I did not. And I gotta tell you, that's the most boring thing in the world. To be hanging around. If they've taken acid and you haven't taken acid, it's like, man, hey, how long are you gonna stare at that fucking cactus? Let's let's go. So there was a lot of that. Yeah. Do you think we could live life beyond fear? Like, I don't know. I'm getting hungry. I was very much in this material world of like,
let me try to get that out of your head with pushing your
yeah,
head into the
right,
cactus. Yeah, yeah.
right. But I didn't see them go crazy, so I figured, okay, well, they didn't lose their minds. Maybe this would be an interesting way to find myself. So
Mhm,
yeah. It did not interfere with the creation of Whipping Boy. So
mhm. So, Eugene, thanks for all the insight. And you know the procedure. We have to go through the infamous quickfire round. I again tried to
okay.
come up with a few things that are related to your biography, and I also tried to come up with things that are a little bit more related to your time
Hmm.
from 62 to the mid 80s. Some of them are a little later, but most of them are in that category. You grew up in New York, and of course, I have to ask something like that. Blondie versus television.
Blondie.
Mhm. Um, as we were also talking about, your father being in the military, and also in your book, you mentioned the Vietnam War and everything.
Hmm.
Two songs by New Yorkers or Jersey people that talk about the Vietnam War. Born in the USA by Springsteen or Good Night Saigon by Billy Joel.
Hmm. I'm a big Billy Joel fan.
Me too.
Yep. So I go with Billy
So
Joel.
that's the answer. Okay. Two movies from your, I think, teenage years. I think those are 70s movies. Bullet with Steve McQueen or Bandit with Burt Reynolds.
Okay, you dropped out a second. I heard two movies, and then
Yeah,
you
two
got
movies
pixelated.
from your childhood from the 70s. Bullet with Steve McQueen or Bandit with Burt Reynolds.
Oh shit, Bullet,
Yeah,
100%.
but you see the connection. I thought of Cars, right?
I do, but you understand. That's a good comparison because Burt Reynolds still was not a joke in the 70s and 80s.
Mhm.
He had aspirations that were not comedic necessarily. I mean, he did
Yeah.
Deliverance in the 70s. He actually did, there he was. I love Burt Reynolds originally before he got into this kind of weird self-parody thing. So,
Mhm.
but Bullet, nobody touched Steve McQueen.
Because of your wife, Krakow or Warsaw?
Oh, I have to say Krakow,
Yes.
because it's where we decided to get married. So
Ooh. So you got married in Warsaw, in Krakow?
no, but
Ah,
it's where we went to Auschwitz, and somehow right after Auschwitz, I go, we should probably get married.
for
It's
something
something,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, somehow it jogged it out of my mind. So yeah,
How was
or
your
into my
experience of the
mind.
place? How did it affect you?
It was the first time I went. Um, we had to stop. I couldn't go on. I couldn't go on, and it was time of year was also rough. I think it was December, so it was a dreary time to be there and a dreary place to be, and it was just we went to the main buildings, and then when they came to if you want to go to Birkenau, I was like, nah, fuck that, I'm done, which made me feel terribly cowardly. And so I made a secondary trip to it, and I was supposed to meet Eva Kor there. And Eva Kor, for those of you who don't know, is one of Mengele's experiment subjects. She was a twin, a Romanian twin, and she started the Forgiveness Project. She's since died, actually, on the occasion of our second trip to Auschwitz. We were supposed to meet there July 5th, which is World Holocaust Remembrance Day, where she was going to be there. And we had already done hours of interviews before, but we're going to meet in person there. And she was going to show me, where I mean, she already talked extensively with me about Mengele. And she died like 2 days before. So I was already there. So I went. And then this time I sucked it up. And it was summer this time, July. It was hotter. And I went to Birkenau and was not affected the same way, but mostly because I was dealing with her passing. So,
Mm.
but yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and for all those who don't know, by trade, being a teacher, history teacher, I go to Poland like every year, and we also always visit Auschwitz.
Hmm.
And I still remember once going in March, and it
Hmm.
was late March, and it was snowing,
Yeah.
and we went to Birkenau, and afterwards, two of the students came up to me and they said, well, we wouldn't have needed it as realistic as it was, but we sure can appreciate the fact that Nazi Germany lost now much more than before.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And I also noticed something about myself. I've been in all those rooms way too often. And
Hmm.
there's one room that I cannot go into anymore, and that's the room with the suitcases, because on one of the
Yeah.
suitcases it says,
Yeah.
and on every suitcase, the Jewish people wrote their names, their birth dates, where they were born,
Mm.
blah, 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 blah. And in one of the names, it says, Sarah, born sometime in like 41, 42, Warsaw, orphan. So it was
Yeah.
clear, okay, she was born before the ghetto uprising in Warsaw. She came there as an orphan because mom and dad probably didn't survive the uprising. When I saw that, and when I thought about what happened, that's not a room I can go into anymore. And that also has to do with my daughter.
Yep.
Before I became a father, it was not a
Hmm.
problem at all. But since then, that's just like tear jerking to me.
Yeah, man. You
But
focus. You focus on something interesting there because, of course, how I approach certain things now very different pre having kids and post having kids. All right. Yeah.
but coming back to something a little bit more fun, you've mentioned David Lynch, one of the
Hmm.
funniest guys on earth.
Hmm.
Twin Peaks or Lost Highway?
Ooh. I'm gonna have to go with wow, wow, wow. That's a rough one, and I can tell you why because I'm a huge Robert Blake fan. So his character, as you know, I'm at your house now, was just a phenomenal take. But the sustained rigor of Twin Peaks, and I'm assuming when you say Twin Peaks, you're also including Firewalk with Me, and the whole. I have to go for that. I thought that was a masterwork. Yep.
Somewhere around the same time as that, Lucius Jackson or L7? Which of the girl rock bands from the
Mm.
time?
Well, that's tough, right? Because Luscious Jackson, New York band, and it didn't have Suzanne, who used to be in the Beastie Boys, in it. Wasn't that her? And I thought she got done dirty by the Beastie Boys.
I
What
would
was
have
her
to
name?
look at one.
Yeah, Kate Schellenbach was the drummer for the Beastie Boys,
Mhm.
and then she got booted when they became a hip hop band. They've realized that it was shitty, and she started the band. But I've actually played with L7 and just did a show with Danita, and I'm gonna have to go with L7. There's a reason for it. There's a part of a longer discussion about it's New York provincialism in a certain way, but that the Beastie Boys were quintessential kind of Upper West Siders.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
for
yeah, they're
sure.
not all of them. There's
But
one lived
two
in
of them
Brooklyn.
aren't, right? Two
Well,
two
one
of
lived
them
in
are from.
Brooklyn. One lived in Brooklyn. One lived down off in the Village. But in an affect, they were. You have to like yeah, the Upper West Side. If I don't know how to explain it, there's a um they sometimes felt like tourists to me, and not particularly nice tourists in that there was an awareness of a certain awareness of class privilege there. But so if I tell somebody in New York, say, he's the Upper West Siders, they understand immediately what I'm talking about. So I
Mhm.
that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and they never did it to me when we're during the hardcore days hanging out in New York. When the Beastie Boys found out that I'd gone to Stuyvesant High School, like I could see that they somehow understood that I was fundamentally different, but they always felt to me like they were aggressively aware of the fact that they were slumming, which I didn't think that was that complimentary of a look. So Kate was always great though. But Luscious Jackson to me seemed to be a product of the Upper West Side, so I was not a huge fan.
We already talked in earlier times about Studio 54, and like one of the most famous guests and customers there was, of course, Warhol. And I know that you are a guy who's interested in a lot of things. So Warhol versus Jackson Pollock.
Oh, Warhol.
Okay.
Even though I get the sense that he was a worse person, um, I didn't have a lot of patience with drunks. I used to be a bouncer, and even when I was drinking, I didn't have a lot of patience with drunks. And so but you just talked about the people. I actually find that I enjoy Pollock's art much more.
Mhm.
But in terms of
Would
what
be
I
the
need,
same with me. I
yeah,
um
yeah,
I also don't know why, but there is something about Pollock that I really admire. I don't know why.
yep. But
Um,
but there's a great relevancy to Warhol. So,
so a question for the fighter, Eugene Robinson. Rocky versus Fight Club.
oh, Fight Club.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, Fight
And
Club.
one last one. Suicide versus Helios Creed.
Oh, that's a good one.
No.
And I have a soft spot in my heart because for Helios, we had friends in common. We may have even been Eskimo brothers, to use an unkind expression to describe men who have had sex with the same woman. Um, and people used to compare Whipping Boy to Helios Creed. However, when I listened to Suicide, I was enraptured. Something very different was happening. And I remember them when I was first getting into punk rock on the Lower East Side, and they had a genuine quality that wasn't there with somebody like Television, and that is that they were fearsome. Like you felt scared seeing them,
Oh, you mean
right?
like fear inducing? Yeah. Yeah.
Fear inducing, yes.
Yeah.
So and that always has been special. I mean, like I used to be a big James Chance guy, but then at one point he was attacking the audience, and I could see that people were like, it was like the e-ticket ride at Disneyland. Like they were happy, and I was like, okay, so this has now become shtick, and I liked it a lot less. With Suicide, you didn't get the sense. They were older, first of all, and they were not using any of the. There seemed to be no shticky about. They seemed to be very deadly, deeply earnest, and that was that was noteworthy.
So, people, this is once again one of those interviews where I'm just simply, I could talk for hours with the guy.
Mhm.
I know he wasn't, but anyway. So, Eugene, thanks for all the highly informative details into your life, good thoughts, and the awesome conversation. Folks, his book is going to be out in a few weeks. When is it going to be out? Tell me again. August, right?
August 29th, Diamanda Gallus's, Michael Jackson, and John Locke's birthdays. Also the day after my birthday. So you
make
could do me
a birthday present.
do me a favor, pre-order it now. And this is something that needs to be said. I didn't realize this until recently, because I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a bunch of books, I'm gonna sell them on the merch table. And the publisher said, and I go, what? So you do realize a couple of things about that. Even if you sell 5,000 books at the merch table, they don't get scanned through the system. So it doesn't count toward your royalties, and it doesn't count in terms of booksellers. They will not register that you sold 5,000 copies, so that your book doesn't get on a bestseller list that way. It doesn't. So I go, so what do I do? I want to. So the best thing is to encourage people to buy it before the show and then offer to autograph it at the show. And that is the most solid way to. So what I'm suggesting, and I'm being as vocal as possible, if you are interested in the book, and what I will sign them at the merch table, but bring your copy to have it signed.
So you heard the man.
You won't be able to buy it at the merch table. So
pre-order your copy. It's a very interesting book. And believe me, I will put in my pre-order after this interview because I've already part of it, but it's a really, really fun book to read because of his nature. And it's a very, very interesting look into the times, the contemporaries, the culture, and of course also into Eugene himself. Reading it, you might understand a few things more, also a few things that I had to learn about him. And that was a very, very good read. If you like this interview, drop us a message somewhere on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you like. Visit our website, go to our Patreon, support us. That would be nice after you pre-ordered his book, so you don't have to spend too much. And Eugene, your chance for any final last words.
I would suggest, if you're comfortable reading English, that you read my Substack, which is called "Look What You Made Me Do." So I'm getting a great amount. I'm getting so much play. You realize it started, and the reason why I got fired from my job that I've been at 10 years is because initially they told me I could start it, and I started it, and then 5 months later they changed their minds and go, "No, you got to pull it down." And I was enjoying myself so much with the writing of it, I was willing to forego not only a job I'd been at for 10 years, but some people need to realize this. I had like 100,000 shares of stock in this company, and I walked away from it just because I wanted to do the Substack. So look up Eugene Robinson Substack. It's called "Look What You Made Me Do." If you're comfortable reading English, you should read it. It's fun. I'm enjoying it. Even
It's
if nobody
definitely
reads
fun.
it, I'm having fun. Yeah, there you go.
So, Eugene, all the best with the book. See you in a few weeks on tour, I hope. And
You will.
talk soon, my friend.
All right, Dustin. Thank you, man.